Art is like masturbation. It is selfish and introverted and done for you and you alone. Now design is like sex. There's someone else involved, their needs are as important as your own, and if everything goes right in the end, everybody is happy, right? So, design is not art. Come on. Make it easy. Okay, so my background, I started out at a very young age of 13 as a intern for a famous Russian company called Paragraph that's responsible for the Apple handwriting recognition on the Apple Newton. Anybody remember the Apple Newton? Yeah? So that was my opportunity to get into it. My family immigrated from Ukraine when I was 8 years old. I was fortunate enough to land in Silicon Valley, just by happenstance. So by 15, I was a professional designer. I was the youngest employee of Kinko's, if you ever heard of Kinko's. And then I went on to the 1.0 dot-coms, where I was running design teams responsible for user interface, user experience of enterprise software. And I ran a printing company, sold that, started a design firm, and then after that started Keen, which is a venture-backed software as a service e-commerce platform for the print industry that I know pretty well. Besides that, I'm a mentor and, among other things, with 500 startups worldwide, with Happy Farm in Ukraine, Innovation Nest here in Poland, and Tech Peaks in Italy, as well as a number of other companies. My education's in design. I'm going to give you a little bit of an education on design overall as well. So, anybody know who this is? No? Okay. This is Dieter Rams. Now anybody know who that is? Anybody recognize the name? Okay, good. So Dieter Rams is famous for leading design at Braun. And why is that important? Right? Do you think that affects your life today, that he was a designer at Braun? There you go. So let's take a look at Dieter Rams' design of some Apple products. Right? So he designed the iPod in 1958. He designed the former Mac Pro in 1967. Right? So Johnny Ive is a big fan. The iMac, right? Here's another radio, right? Even some of the applications take a lot of influence from Dieter Rams. And then this is the most recent one. That's a New York City trash can. Fantastic design, right? So Dieter Rams had 10 principles of good design, right? That he authored and he put in place and put into the world in the early 80s. He's still alive, he's still very active, but these have been very helpful to the world. All right? So principle number 1 of good design is that good design is innovative. The possibilities for innovations are not by any means exhausted, he said. Technological development is always offering new opportunities for innovative design, but innovative design always develops in tandem with innovative technology and can never be an end in and of itself. So with every generation of new technology, you have a lot of opportunities to improve the lives of your customers, right? Make things easier, faster, cheaper, create new possibilities, right? So innovation is a big part of good design. The second principle of good design is it makes a product more useful, right? The product has to be useful. It's not art. It's not purely for visual enjoyment. So a product is brought to be used. It has to satisfy certain criteria, not only functional, but also psychological and aesthetic. Good design emphasizes the usefulness of a product whilst disregarding anything that could possibly distract from it. So form definitely follows function. The third principle of good design is that it is aesthetic. The aesthetic quality of a product is integral to its usefulness because products we use every day affect our person and our well-being. But only well-executed objects can be beautiful. Now, good design also makes a product understandable, right? That means that if you design a mobile app and the first time a user opens it and you give them a layer on top that says this is how you use the app, you failed. It clarifies the product structure. Better still, it can make the product talk. At best, it is self-explanatory, right? This is why Apple's products in the last 15 years have been embraced so much because they're so easy to use, right? And we'll talk about that in a second as well. So good design is unobtrusive. Products fulfilling a purpose are like tools. They're neither decorative objects nor works of art. Their design should therefore be both neutral and restrained to leave room for the user's self-expression. Good design is also honest. It does not make a product more innovative, powerful, or valuable than it really is. It does not attempt to manipulate the consumer with promises that cannot be kept. If your product makes a promise that you cannot fulfill, the difference between the expectations of your user or customer and what you deliver will destroy that trust, right? Good design is long-lasting, right? This razor design still being basically used today, right? It's over 50 years old. So it avoids being fashionable and therefore never appears antiquated. Unlike fashionable design, it lasts many years, even in today's throwaway society. And he said today's throwaway society over 30 years ago, right? Today, it's orders of magnitude faster. All the trends go faster. You can tell how old a website is, you know, by a snap visual judgment on it, right? In 6 months, 12 months, trends change. So you have to make sure that good design, the basics, the roots, the DNA of your design is following the functionality and is not following any kind of visual trends or design trends. Because then you're stuck, you're going to have to redesign visually. So good design is also thorough. Nothing must be arbitrary or left to chance. Care and accuracy in design process show respect towards the consumer. This is you developing use cases and testing your product, your software, your service again and again and again and again, right? In a lot of cases, you won't know the use cases. So you have to release something very simple and observe how your customers, your users use it, right? That allows you to then fine-tune the product for how they actually use it in the real world. So good design is also environmentally friendly. Design makes an important contribution to the preservation of the environment. It conserves resources and minimizes physical and visual pollution throughout the life cycle of the product. Also, if it's well designed, it's going to last a long time. It's not going to be disposable, right? And finally, good design is as little design as possible. Less but better, because it concentrates on the essential aspects, and the products are not burdened with non-essentials. Back to purity, back to simplicity. This is what companies like Apple live by, right? So, we talked about good design, right? So now let's talk about some bad design. So a couple of weeks ago, there was a conference in HORE, Croatia. Beautiful hotel, gorgeous, right? Amazing time. So as soon as we arrived there, we've encountered some really bad design. And I'll show you a few things. So first of all, you probably can't see it very well, but to get to your room, right, the directions, the rooms were not numbered by the floors or by the wing. You basically had to get directions to your room, right? It was kind of random numbering. So you go down the hall, you go down a staircase, you go down another hall, go down another staircase, and you find another room that starts with a 2, right? Another thing here, you can't really tell what's wrong with this picture, but you can now, right? There's your mirror, right? So here's the shower. Years of training shows you that hot is on the left, cold is on the right. What do you think happened in this hotel? Right? So it's backwards there. And the favorite part was this. That is the toilet in this hotel. So you really had to use it to really appreciate how bad design this is. But if you lift this beautiful square thing that somebody with obsessive compulsive disorder designed in the shower in this bathroom, there's just a normal toilet under there that works much better, right? So, out of all these words, what do you think is the most important for good design? Okay, maybe second best. Keep going. Okay, that's good. Keep going. I'll give you a hint. It's the biggest word on there. There you go. Don't troll. All right. All right. So consistency. Consistency. When you look at something and you think it's professional, it's trusted, what you're really seeing, what you're interpreting is that it's clean and consistent, right? You get a consistent experience with it. And what happens really is that you're sending a message of trust and quality when you have that. So how important is that perception, right, in your design? So everybody know mint.com? Yes? Okay, so they had quite a big challenge. They had to design to solve this problem. We're a new website, and you're going to come to this website that you've never heard of before. You're going to sign up for it, and you're going to give us all of your banking logins. Right? That is quite a design challenge to build that kind of trust. And when they were designing the look and feel of it, their brand, their messaging, this is what they were trying to achieve, is a trust. Right? Now, everybody familiar with this store? Right? What is it that they sell? And what is cosmetics? If you're good. It's dirt, oil, wax, and fragrance, right? In a nice, shiny box. And the retail markup on makeup is 60 to 80%, right? That's how much Sephora keeps. Not even to mention the manufacturing cost, which is close to nothing. So how much is design worth, right? Let's take a look at a few different categories of products. All right, jeans, retail markup, 100 to 350% markup. Right? The difference between these jeans that cost about $700 and something else, you know. Furniture, 200 to 400%. That's a Herman Miller chair. That design is over 60 years old. Right? Still around today. Talk about non-fashionable design, right? Long-lasting design. Anybody recognize these shoes? Yep. There you go. Paul knows. Ladies, go talk to Paul. 100 to 500% markup. These shoes probably a lot more, actually. And eyewear, 800 to 1,000% markup. This is why Warby Parker exists. Because they decided, well, we don't need 800%, we'll take 300%. All of a sudden, they're cheap. And the winner is drugs. 200 to 5,600% markup. Near the lower part of the range are generic drugs, right? When the patent expires, and you have plain drugs in a plain bottle. But 5,600% is your brand name drugs that are virtually, chemically they're the same, right? But you're paying for that brand and that trust. So Steve Jobs very correctly said, design is not just what it looks like, but design is how it works. And I would venture to say that all design is how it works and what kind of perception it gives you, right? So let's see if we can get some volume on this. So I'm going to show you a little video, and you tell me if that's good design or not. You get a mic? So that is called a Rube Goldberg machine. also known as Salesforce.com. So, do you think it's good design? I think I kind of gave it away. Yeah, so it would be much easier to have the easy button, right? So, and that applies to what you guys design as well. So your application, let's take a look, let's bring it all down to software now, right? So most of you here are working on software. So your application, at the core of it, has data, right? Then there's a logic layer around that. And then somewhere, at some point, you put an interface layer on it, right? Well, here's how your users see it. First, they see the interface. And then there's some magic in there, right? So fact is that 99% of the world does not understand the magic of programming. So what do you think is more important towards user acquisition or getting downloads, all those things? Does it matter what kind of database you use or any of that? Unless you're Twitter and you're falling down on your knees every 10 minutes, probably not, right? That's a high-class problem. So my favorite all-time quote, Jeff Raskin, who actually started the Macintosh project at Apple before Steve took it out from under him and I guess fired him or got rid of him somehow. As far as the customer is concerned, the interface is the product. Now, being somewhat visible in the design community, I get a lot of emails and calls asking, hey, do you know a designer? Our product is done. We're ready to go. Everything is done. We just need a designer. I say, great, because design goes first. It doesn't really make sense, but tell me more. So there's a big difference in the different categories of designers, right? The different disciplines in design. So let's talk about those. The very basics of graphic design. Graphic design comes from the world of designing data, designing graphics, right? Edward Tufte. You should read up on if you're interested in it. But their job really is to create the branding. And the branding can consist of the name, the logo, the color scheme, according to your industry, according to your audience, etc. Illustration, typography, image manipulation, those are the skills that this person has. Okay? And the output that this person provides is a brand. And the brand speaks to your customer, right? Your brand will look a lot different if you're a bank than you are a video game, obviously, right? So that's this person's job. When you get into the software side and you're designing the user experience, this is not the same person that will do, the UX/UI. It's not one thing, it's not interchangeable. These are completely two different things. The user experience person has a lot of business experience, right? They need to understand the problem in depth. They understand the medium, right? Is it a mobile app? Is it a web app? How are people going to use this? In what environment? They understand psychology of the user, what motivates them, right? And ultimately, they need to sense intent. What does the user want to do? What's in it for them? And what are you trying to get the user to do, right? With those two inputs and the input of what medium you're operating in, you can start designing some kind of a solution to a problem. So as you heard me yesterday, I was talking about who's the customer, what's the problem? Because without that, you have nothing to design, right? Now the UI or the visual person comes next, right? Once you know what you have, the output from the user experience person is usually a set of wireframes or a prototype, some kind of a workflow, some kind of a flow diagram, right? Then the UI or the visual person has the needed information to start putting a visual layer on top. They combine the branding that the graphic designer came up with, right? And they put this visual layer on top of the user experience that was somehow developed, right? And their job is to surface functionality. If you want that user to click on that button, this person's job is to make it the right color, right? Now, the next handoff is to the front-end developer. And that person is very much part of the design team, probably more so than they are part of the engineering team. They're that bridge, right? And their job is to execute the user experience and the user interface to the same level of detail as were planned, right? And nothing for a designer is more frustrating than the front end being kind of thrown out when they obsessed, pixel by pixel, they zoomed in all the way and they made sure everything is perfect. Then for them to see all of their grids broken and all the margins off and everything else. So this person still has to have a design eye. It can't be a pure engineer. It has to be a person that can bridge that gap. And a good person on this side is worth their weight in gold, right? Because they can actually make it real, right? The marketing team, right, is the last component. They are also very important part of it, right? This is the copywriting. This is the voice of the customer, right? They are communicating to the customer, they're doing the sales pitch, they're interfacing with that customer, and they're bringing that feedback back to the engineering team to go through another iteration, right? So together, you have 5 different, very distinct disciplines. In some cases, you have experienced people that can do multiple things well, but it's going to be very difficult to have one person be an expert in everything, right? It's possible, but not for somebody straight out of school. They're not going to have experience in every single category, no matter how many school projects they did, right? So, good design is obvious. Great design is transparent. Again, back to not getting in the way of the functionality, right? So let's talk about user-centric design. Everybody heard this concept, I'm sure you've heard it kind of mentioned as an intent, you know, let's make this user-friendly, user-centric. Well, user-centric design was a specific thing, right? So this is what computers looked like before, where you had trained engineers to operate them, trained operators. So in this case, it's like flying an airplane. If you want to fly an airplane, you're going to learn how to do it, right? It doesn't matter if it looks complex to somebody that doesn't know how to fly when they get in the cockpit. Same thing here. They were trained, their job was to operate computers. But then something happened, right? We had personal computers, and we had non-professionals start to use computers. That's when you needed to start designing for pedestrians or normal people to be able to use these complicated applications and get the benefit out of them, right? So that's when user-centric design came along, right? That's when the focus started. But one thing, and again, I'll use Apple as an example, is that no successful product ever came out of a focus group, right? The customers will not tell you what they want, right? It goes back to Henry Ford. If I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. They don't know what's possible. You need to observe them. If you're providing them value, you're providing them a solution. You need to observe them using whatever they're using now or experiencing that problem, and your job is to design a solution given the technology that's available, given the techniques that are available, etc. That's how you provide value, right? So what does it take for a successful design? What's the formula? If you can't do a focus group, you can't ask your customer to tell you what they need, right? You can't trust them because they don't know what's possible. What do you do, right? Let's take a look at it. So Jared Spool from User Interface Engineering, I highly recommend you follow him if you care anything about design. And I'll post these slides, so you'll have everything, including his Twitter handle. He's hilarious, one, but the other part of it is that his company goes into complex design projects, and they will analyze them and try to improve them, right? So they'll go and analyze, why are things failing? Why aren't they delivering results? Big websites for big companies or big applications, right? And the results they came back with is that the formula for successful design, meaning that solves a problem, is as follows. So first of all, you have to have a vision, right? If you go to a customer and ask them, what's your problem, and you do that with every customer, congratulations, you have a consulting company. But if you're building a product, you have to have a vision for what problem you're solving and at least some approximate direction of how you're going to do it. And you have to stay relatively true to it until you realize maybe that's the wrong way. We need to pivot and do it slightly different way. But what you're doing is you're not designing for the customer, you're designing with the customer in mind, right? So meaning you take their feedback, right? You listen, you talk to all your customers. They're not going to tell you exactly what to do. But you talk to all of your customers, as customer development, get out of the building concept, right? You go and you talk and you start hearing patterns. You start hearing patterns in the problems that they're experiencing. You'll start hearing feedback patterns in the product that you put in front of them. They're going to start asking you questions where they might be confused. They're going to start asking you for certain features, and if you start hearing patterns and you think it's in line with your vision, that's when you start adding these features, but not before that, right? Now, the culture within the company is very important as well. Each company has a culture, whether they intend to develop a good culture, quote unquote, or not, right? They might have a culture of being perfectionists, or they might have a culture of getting things out the door as quickly as possible. Ideally, you have a combination of a couple of these elements, right? And then finally, you have techniques. You have professionals that are trained in their craft that need to keep learning. They need to keep learning. They need to keep adding things, putting it in their back pocket. So how many musicians here in the room? Any musicians? Anybody play instruments? Raise your hands. Don't be shy. Few, right? There you go. So when you listen to music, you pick up on certain things and you remember them. So next time you're playing, if you play jazz especially, right? I'm a jazz drummer, so this is home for me. you pull these things out, these little techniques, these little tricks, and you use them in context. So it's very important that everybody keeps learning in their field and putting these techniques in their back pocket, right? So that's the formula. So let's talk about the design paradigms. This is from user interface engineering as well. So there are 4 different design paradigms. The first being unintentional design. Unintentional design is what I like to call design by engineers for engineers, right? This is when you have to use it. It's like that old terminal, and you're going to put up with whatever interface is in front of you, right? So here's an example of that, right? So Craigslist was designed in, I think this pretty much was designed in 1997, and pretty much stayed that way since. And they're not really motivated to redesign it because they have all the traffic. But now the single categories are getting pulled away from Craigslist. And at some point, they will have to update it, right? So the next paradigm is called self-design. Self-design means that I'm the customer of the product, I know what I need, and I'm going to design a solution for myself. So that's great, but it has 2 requirements. 1, you have to use the product every single day, not for testing, but as a customer would actually use it, right? And 2, you have to be a member of a market that's big enough and interesting enough, right? So there's a lot of engineers that solve their own solutions, and then they try to make a startup out of it, and then they realize that nobody else wants this. Nobody else has this problem, right? This happens a lot, right? So the next paradigm is called genius design. Genius design means I have so much experience in that industry that I know better than the customer what they need and how to solve their problem, right? So when I look at startup pitches, to me, one of the most important things is, do they have domain expertise? Do they have insight into a particular problem? Can they execute genius design, right? Because if you can come out of the gate with version 1 and you can successfully execute genius design, you might be onto something, right? And ultimately, the kind of the surefire way to have a successful design is activity focused. That means you study the problem. It's something new. You study the problem and you put it out there and you iterate endlessly. You have this feedback loop and you try to keep improving and listening to your customer, okay? So that brings us to my approach to designing software and applications, which is I call design-driven development. It simply means that design goes first, obviously. I think by this point you understand my particular religion in this, right? So I usually start with the problem definition. Who's the customer? What's the problem? Why are we doing this? What are we trying to do? Very simple, right? So next thing we'll do is move on to wireframes and prototypes. Let's play with it. Let's put it on the whiteboard. Let's draw it on a piece of paper. Very low fidelity wireframes, right? So you start seeing it in action. Most people are visual, right? Over 50%. So that's a good way to get started. Application that I use when I go to high fidelity wireframes is called Axure, A-X-U-R-E, right? You can use, there's lots of wireframing apps, but Axure is kind of a professional tool where you can actually prototype. Without writing a single line of code, you can actually make an actual clickable mock-up of your application within minutes, hours, not days or weeks or months. So you don't have to wait to validate some of the basics, right? If it's obviously wrong, you don't have to throw away any code. You didn't invest any development time into it, right? So once you have wireframes and prototypes, you can move on to visual design. This is great input for a visual designer. If you have these things in place, right? If you have a prototype, you can actually outsource the user interface design, right? Because they have all the information they need, if you do a good job of handing it off, to give you something complete back, kind of throw it over the fence. And a great practice here, especially if you're working in complex kind of B2B software, you will have only a handful of design patterns within your application, right? You might have a 200-page application, but there are maybe 8 or 10 different types of pages that keep repeating. So what that means is when you actually contract a visual design firm, you can actually ask them to just design examples of each one of those screens instead of designing every single one. And then you have a kit that you can give to your front-end development team to then iterate on it and utilize, right? So once you have all these things, you can start doing things in parallel, but once you know what this thing is going to be, only then should you start architecting it, really. Otherwise, you don't know what the customer is going to experience, right? A lot of times, especially engineer founders, they'll jump straight to structuring the database and figuring out the models and all these things before they even know what the user experience needs to be like, right? Then they end up throwing away a lot of it, right? Front-end development also happens in parallel, right? And then the actual application development, you backfill the back end to make it all work. And then you get it to your marketing team to get it out to the customer and get that customer feedback. And then you do it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, right? This is how you iterate a product to get to perfection, whatever that is, today, tomorrow, the next day, right? Sure.
I can see the user interface design before front-end development, and I think, okay, if I do the design, like the graphics and all those things, and then the developers decided that this doesn't work and so on, I have to like repaint all the design.
So your visual designer should know the engineering cost of all of their design decisions. That means if they put some kind of a navigation element or some kind of interactive element, they need to know, at least within an order of magnitude, what that will mean for the engineering team. And hopefully there's not a whole lot of back and forth. There's always communication. There's always small adjustments. But there shouldn't be huge pushback from the development team saying, you're crazy, I can't do this, right?
Okay.
Then you have the wrong person.
Okay, thank you.
I've seen customer feedback come as early as the second step.
Yes. It depends on the product, right? So if you're dealing with consumers, you need to usually give them something much more fully baked, right? And you're going to get the type of feedback you're going to get from consumers many times is they either use it or they don't. Most times they don't, and you have to figure out why they didn't. Or they'll download it and never open it again, right? So the difference between a successful mobile app and a not so successful is 50% of the users open it a second time, or 5% of users open it a second time, right? So if it's a B2B product and you're dealing with a specific industry, yeah, you might want to show them the prototypes. That's enough for them to start telling you if you're going in the right direction, right? But as you're iterating, the first time around when you have nothing to show, right, get to code as quickly as you can. But the first time, yeah, you might be able to validate as early as the prototypes. But the second time around, you already have something they're showing them. Any other questions on this? We can come back to as well. So design is intelligence made visible. This is Don Newgreen. He's a professor somewhere in the East Coast. I forget. He does not have a Twitter handle. Sorry. So when you go to the doctor, you say, doctor, it hurts here. When you go to a designer, define the problem and let the designers do their jobs. Don't use their hands, their Photoshop skills, and you be the designer. If you want to do that, be the designer, leave them alone. But otherwise, define the problem, go to the designer, and trust them. Just look at their portfolio, figure out if you want to work with them. When you're interviewing them, don't just look at their portfolio, but ask them what problems they were solving and have them walk you through and justify their design decisions. Design is problem solving, right? It's not, it's pretty. I just felt in a happy mood that day, right? That's art. So let designers do their jobs and give them autonomy. Just pick one that you agree with, their theory in general, and let them do their job. So how do you work with designers? Right, so everybody needs something. Right? Designers need something as well. And I'll give you a hint, it's not necessarily more money. It has to be market rate, but there are more important things that will bring them to your side. Especially when you're a startup, you can't afford to pay as much as Google does. Right, Don? So how do you get designers to come to your side and work crazy hours and on your little product and get paid relatively very little, probably half or less than what they can get in a big company? Well, okay. So what are your dreams? I'll play. Okay. Sounds like a really complicated problem, right? So yeah, show them an interesting problem to solve, right? Just like engineers like complex things, they're going to get bored with the same old thing, right? Designers need interesting problems to solve, challenges, right? We thrive on that. Another thing you need to give them is a Google campus from Israel, right? It's a creative environment, right? So there are lots of studies, lots of psychology studies, sociology studies that say that a creative environment has lots of natural light, has tall ceilings, all sorts of things. So you don't want to put them in the basement, but you want to give them a creative environment, right? So what kind of office you have and what kind of work conditions you have. That's pretty important to the creative side of the world, right? But ultimately, designers consider themselves problem solvers, again, right? So you need to give them decision-making power. You need to give them the opportunity to solve the problems and do their job. If you stifle them, if you tell them what to do, if you micromanage them, that's a very quick way to piss somebody off and make them go away, right? So let's play a little game, right? So there's the value pyramid, fast, cheap, good, right? So here's a design version of that. So we have fast, cheap, and great, and free, fourth bubble. So if you want it fast and cheap, it's going to be ugly, rushed, and careless, right? If you want it to be great and cheap, it's never going to be on time. If you want it free and great, it doesn't exist. If you want it free and fast, it's garbage. And the sweet spot here, the lesser of all evils, it's fast and great. And usually you get what you pay for, right? You're going to pay for it. If you want it fast and you want it great. So when you're looking at your startup, there are really 3 legs of the stool. Without it, really can't stand up. There's obviously the business side, right? What business are you in? This needs to be a person that can come up with a business model, come up with the numbers behind it, look at a market, be able to sell, be able to bring it to the customer and talk to customers and not be afraid of them, right? Lots of engineers hate people, right? So they're not going to be the ones going and talking to customers. Right? There's obviously engineering. We're talking about software, we're talking about hardware products, we're talking about startups. Right? You need to build something. The third leg is design. Either intentional or unintentional. You either pay attention to it because that's one of the most important things to your customers, or you don't and you will fail. So design is core. Remember that. Live by it. We're very important as designers. So thanks for your attention. If you want the slides, just follow me on Twitter, and I'll tweet out the link. Thanks.
Have you got any questions, suggestion?
There's usually lots of questions. Yep. Suggestions?
Hi, Vitaly. Can I briefly get your thoughts on the new trend to flat design that Apple is championing at the moment?
You know, I was really I hated the fact that Apple went there, but they kind of had to go there. The reason for skeuomorphic design was born was because when you're trying to psychologically get people to go to a new paradigm, right? They're going from physical buttons that they understand to a flat screen with nothing on it. They still need to understand these are buttons, right? So skeuomorphism emulates physical objects so people easily understand that it's like a physical object. Well, now, 6, 7 years later, everybody understands what a touchscreen is. And it was inevitable that Apple is going to go there. What sucks about it is that because Apple sets all the trends, a lot of people are going to have to redesign everything. Otherwise, it's going to look dated in a year. So that's the part I was kind of dreading, like, we have drop shadows in our application, no. So that's my thought on it. But it's inevitable. It's next paradigm. You know, kudos to Microsoft for really kind of pulling the trigger, but unfortunately, they did the right thing in mobile too little, too late, and Apple is going to drive the trend forward. Just is.
So Vitaly, you are a designer and you are an entrepreneur. How do you combine the two?
It's actually pretty easy, right? Because good entrepreneurs are informed designers, they're problem solvers. It's the same skill set. I just happen to have some more education and technical training of actually executing the design. But in reality, some of the best CEOs are very product, everybody that describes themselves as a product-driven CEO versus like a finance or sales-driven person, they are really designers. They have a design mindset, right? So if you look at, Apple's success with products, it was very design-driven, right? Whereas you look at Microsoft's decline, it's all, optimization and iterating on the financial model because being driven by a salesperson, right? Steve Ballmer is a salesperson. He does not understand or think in terms of design, right? And you can see the difference, what happened in the last decade in those companies. Back.
I got a question regarding products which could have like two totally different customers or the users. Let's imagine you have an app for kids where the parent and the kid is almost equally important as a user of an app. So in such a condition, would you prefer to focus on one of them, try to share a design that will fit for both of them, or anything else? What would you advise?
So without getting into details, you basically, first of all, you want to try to design, solve one problem first. Make sure that you have solved that problem. Right? You're solving, it's basically algebra for one variable or two. Solving for one variable is a lot easier, right? The other thing is, what's important to the parents may be that their kids are enjoying that app, right? And the parents make the buying decisions. But you're not going to convince the parents if the user interface appeals to them. You're going to convince them that if their kids are enjoying and spending a lot of time on it, learning whatever goals the parents have for their kids, that will motivate them to buy the app, right? So you are really designing for adoption of the kid. That will motivate the parent. If you're designing an app that both parents and kids use, that's a slightly different story, but still very similar, right? If you design just for the parent, it's not going to be fun for the kids. Probably the app won't work. The whole model won't work. If you design it for kids and they're having a good time, their parents, even though it's not completely designed for them, they'll still use it, right? So if you have to choose one, it's probably for the kid in that case.
There was this slide, how to deal with a designer, yes? So it was like a programmer-centric, to use the parallel. The other side of the coin, how the designers should deal with programmers, or the business side of the triangle, like engineers and business sort of person unit, because this is an issue too.
This is a little out of scope, right, for this talk. But, well, I mean, everybody has something that they need, right? So engineers have certain needs. Business usually wants to just please and surprise their customer. So what's important for the business person, right? If this is truly just three different people, right, in the abstract, for the business, it just means that, that the product is successful, the customers are happy, the product sells itself. Right? So the designer has to justify their design decisions and make design decisions based on the fact that the product will be more adopted. Then the business person is happy. On the engineering side, engineers get really upset, I've noticed, when you change your mind a lot and they have to throw away a lot of code. So ideally, you try to avoid that. You try to avoid making big changes. If you are forced to make big changes, then you have really good justification for it. This, again, brings it back to really having that minimum viable product. What's a minimum viable product? Is the minimum feature set that will motivate your customer to use it, buy it, etc. All the other things on top, all the nice-to-haves, come later, right? So if you've proven that you're going in the right direction, odds are you won't have to make big changes, right? You're going to just keep adding to it, right? So kind of in the abstract, that's how I would answer it, is try to, designers, good ones, try to avoid making massive changes too often. Right, because that will piss off the engineering team, guaranteed. Anybody else? Going once, twice. JD.
Sold, yeah.
Sold.
So for a lot of startups, whether you're in Europe or the US, it's kind of a hard thing to find good UX people, right? So what's the secret to getting some great UX designers on your team? Where do you find them? Do you go to their conferences and scope them out, or?
Yeah, go to the conferences. So I've had a much harder problem recruiting really solid engineers for my companies. With design, it's kind of a variable degree, right? So either you do it yourself and you stumble and it sucks and it's not good, but there's something there, right? And a lot of people end up doing that, at least at first. With engineering, if you don't have somebody that can write code, you cannot build software. You're even more screwed. So how do you find, where do you find good designers is places, it is design conferences, not meetups where you have basically 3 people in the room that consider themselves professors and everybody else in the room is trying to learn, right? There you don't find that nice middle ground. But you go to conferences and you show an interest, and more than anything, you polish. Oh, I guess that's it. You polish your sense of good design, and you polish the tools and the things that you give to the designers, right? If you can attract them by giving them a really interesting problem and showing them your vision, right? If you can convince somebody of the problem, that's a vision. If you can't, it's a hallucination, right? So you have to provide them these things, you know, that interesting challenges and a great environment and decision-making power, and go to where they hang out, which is, you know, there's an oasis in the middle of the desert where it's where they all hang out. No, but it's right now that's one of the hardest things in Silicon Valley, right? So you have a big advantage in Central Eastern Europe is that you have a lot of well-trained engineers and designers, and not as many competitive projects and not as many large companies like Google and Facebook and Twitter that are absorbing as many people as they can find, right? One reason is to actually put hurdles in front of each other, right? If they can't staff up, then they can't grow as quickly as they should, right? And that's the challenge we have in Silicon Valley. Is the biggest problem, if anything, is that we don't have that raw material or enough of it, which is good engineers and experienced designers. So I don't know, I kind of talk circles around it. I'm not sure if I answered it, but hopefully I did.
Vitaly, I think the advantage that startups have in attracting great designers is the freedom to design and create something new.
Right.
Because there are a lot of very frustrated designers at Apple and Google and Facebook. Yes, we pay them a lot of money, but they're very constrained. And a great designer wants to work on new things, not products that are 10 years old. And they don't want to be constrained by all these corporate things. So startups really do have an advantage in attracting great designers. They just can't pay them as much money.
Right. Well, so I have a question for you, Don, actually. So my theory is that Marissa was holding everybody back, and now that she's left, coincidentally, all the Google products were redesigned qualitatively instead of the data-driven design that only existed for a decade, right? There's a lot of horror stories and a lot of pissed off designers that left because every single design decision was A/B tested. Like, change a shade of blue on a button, A/B test that to death. And you can only do that. You can only do that when you've decided you're in the right place. You've kind of arrived and you've solved the problem. You can then kind of iterate in small increments, you know, a few more percentage points of adoption, a few more percentage points in the right direction. But sometimes you have to step back and look at the problem again anew and have a qualitative redesign based on where technology is today, what the competition is doing in general, etc. And that's where a lot of products get stale, like Craigslist, where they don't come in and do a wholesale redesign based on where technology is today, based on design principles, based on what users expect today. So would you agree, Don? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. But I'd also say that there's an equal number of frustrated designers at Apple. So Apple's the greatest design company in the world.
Maybe.
But they're constrained and
they're under NDA. They're not allowed to say that they are.
They are. They're frustrated. So startups have a unique advantage there.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely what startups offer is ability to do a very wide range of work. Sometimes it's like beyond your expertise or comfort level. Whereas if you work for a large company, you can have a PhD in design and you're going to be moving one piece of paper from the right side of your desk to the left side of the desk every day, all day, right? Very narrow focus. So, yeah. Anybody else? Fine.
The last short question.
There is a Czech entrepreneur who now has several companies in USA. And according to like the design and so on, when he started to try to start very lean. He has several e-shops and web services, and they have actually quite horrible design if you consider it like how it looks and how it works. But those things are quite innovative and they work. And actually, I think, and he says that the design is always overrated. And we can see it like on the Craigslist, like everyone from nowadays perspective says like cannot work, but people somehow figure out how it works, and maybe it's so practical.
No, it's the reason that they're there is because it's a marketplace and everybody's used to going to a marketplace. If you launch Craigslist today, right? Imagine Craigslist didn't exist and you launched that today. What do you think would happen?
It's a list of some things.
You're an engineer, aren't you?
No. I'm actually I'm user interface designer.
Okay.
And you know I have several products.
Yep.
And a few of them have at least or as little design as possible.
That's
and
exactly
work.
right. Yeah. No, it's not about creating intricate designs. It's actually about simplicity. Right. I'll give you an example of bad design. Everybody heard of Color, the app that raised $41 million before launch? Yeah. So why do they fail? Primarily. Yeah. Well, it's not that nobody knew that they wanted to use it. Everybody was trying it. No, the problem was that they were trying to be too crafty with their user interface design, and they completely reinvented. So when people downloaded, they were utterly confused. What am I supposed to do with this? Right? So that was like designers doing design for the sake of design and really kind of, you know, designing the form and no function. So that's an example of kind of the opposite direction. Yeah, great design is super, super simple. It gets the job done. It has a clear promise, and it fulfills that promise beyond somebody's expectations.
The question was more like if I am as a startup,
Yeah.
I try to be as lean as possible.
Yeah.
And if I like create some website or application which I have to test, and I test it somehow, create some graphics and everything, then I realized in a few weeks that I have to throw it away and do it from the scratch and everything. Like not doing the design, just focusing on like the usability itself, or not usability, just existence of user interface. Like everything more is
Right. You're absolutely right. So you're talking about defining the problem.
Yeah. Yes, and then you go further.
Yeah.
And further.
You're going to have some kind of user interface. It doesn't have to be complicated or crafty.
Yes, but I thought that like wireframes should be engineered, so I can use like some interface which looks like wireframes,
Okay.
but use it with
That's the
working
prototype.
code.
That's your prototype. But now there are tools out there that you don't have to write any code. You can have prototypes in the browser with plain HTML, right? So we can talk more about it offline.
Okay.
But you're right. You're right. It's not about crafty design or overdoing it, because until you know what's going on and why you're doing it, there's no purpose of going crazy. All right? Thanks, guys and gals.